Hey, what is up guys? David Zhao here, and today we're going to be talking about Sony's latest releases of lenses, the three new ultra-compact, ultra-light, full-frame prime lenses, the Sony 24mm f2.8G, the 40mm f2.5G, and the 50mm f2.5G. And since we're talking about ultra-compact setups with these full-frame lenses, let's test it with Sony's most compact full-frame mirrorless camera. That would be the Sony A7C. Honestly, I love this thing. This is literally the A7 III, just in a smaller body with a flippy tilty screen, better I/O, and yeah, this is literally the A7 III, but just in a smaller body. Like if you're gonna decide on getting the A7 III and you wanted a smaller camera body, this would be it. I would get this. As always guys, if you're interested in checking out any of these lenses or the Sony A7C, links will be in the description down below. So let's go ahead and start off by talking about the similarities between these three lenses. Now, one thing that I think is super cool is they're all the same size, if you can see here, and they all have that distinct G series lens design with, of course, your black G logo with a autofocus manual focus switch. They even have a click declick switch for your aperture ring, which I think is super cool, a programmable button, and yeah, you heard me right, it has an aperture ring, characteristic of the G series lens lineup. On top of that, you also have your focus ring all the way at the very front of the lens, which I think is very interesting. On the 24mm, you may be finding yourself accidentally getting your fingers in the shot while trying to rack focus. So that's one thing to consider. But all of these lenses have metal gear teeth, very similar to the Sony 45mm lens, and most of the body is either made out of metal or this very hard plastic, which I really like. The durability and feel of the lens feels very premium. Another way these lenses are very similar is that they share the same 49mm filter thread size, so you could use the same filter on all three lenses. However, that doesn't really do you very much good because 49mm threads is kind of an odd thread sizing, plus you'll probably be wanting to buy larger filters anyways and then just step all these up from that. One thing I think is very interesting about these lenses is they're all dimensionally like the same, right? Like the aperture and the focus ring are the same distance apart from the bottom of the lens, and it's all built similarly with the same filter thread. It almost feels like these are supposed to be budget cine lenses, because a feature that people like to see in cine lenses is having the same dimensions, since that way you can use the same focus pulling setup, the same gears set in the same places. That way you can swap lenses mid-shoot without having to reset up your video camera rig. So I think it's kind of neat that they did that. Another few things I want to mention about the similarities between these three lenses. Regardless of which one of these lenses you get, you're going to get very similar flaring control and flaring characteristics. They all have this soft flaring characteristic, which is nice and cinematic and pleasing to the eye, even if it's not completely flare controlled. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was the autofocus. All of the autofocus is quick, but not like super snappy. If you're familiar with using the G Master series of these lenses, then you'll notice that the G series lenses, or at least this set of G series lenses, the autofocus is quick. It's quick to acquire, but it's not as quick as you would find on the G Master series. To start off, let's talk about the 24mm f2.8G. Now, if you've been a fan of this channel for a while, you'll know that the 24mm focal length is my absolute favorite when it comes to photography and videography. You're looking at both a wide angle field of view, but also not so wide that you can't capture things like environmental portraits. The best part about a 24mm lens is that it is probably the most versatile focal length for a prime lens, right? Like if you're looking at a 50mm or 85mm, those are really great at portraits, but not so good if you just want a lens on your camera body at all times, if you're traveling, if you're vlogging. On the flip side, if you have anything wider, like a 16mm, as nice as it is to get all that field of view in, amazing for vlogging, not so great for capturing things like portraits. So 24 sits in that nice sweet spot where you can, record yourself in a car, you can record yourself in a plane, you can take portraits, environmental portraits with backgrounds in view, and do it all from a single lens. That's why I've been such a big fan. Whenever people ask me for camera and lens recommendations, I always recommend them something like the A6100 and the Sigma 16. And now, if anybody wants to ask me for camera and lens recommendations, but they say, hey, I want a full frame camera, I would easily be able to recommend something like the A7 III or the A7C, and the first lens I'd recommend them is this 24mm f2.8G. My favorite thing about this lens is that 24mm is just the perfect focal length to be an always on the camera and take it with you anywhere kind of lens. So usually if you have something like this is really easy to take with you on trips, on vacations, whether you're just going out with friends. This is great for capturing content and still good enough and high quality enough to do professional work with. The only con with this lens that I noticed is the fact that it is f2.8. Now, if you're privileged enough to be shooting with f1.8, f1.4, even heck, f1.2 gear, you'll know that one, you get beautifully blurry backgrounds, and two, more importantly, is you get way more light. At f2.8, I really wouldn't love to have it for things like indoor or night shoots. If you shoot a lot of things like club or event photography or videography, f2.8 is going to be very limiting if you can't bring your own light source. By having f2.8, you're going to end up having to result in pushing up your ISO or dropping your shutter speed, both of which are compromises which will affect your overall image quality. So that's about the only bad thing I can say. But again, it's f2.8. That's actually not that bad, you know. At least it's not like f4. The next lens I'd like to talk about is the 50mm f2.5G. Now, this I think is going to become the new nifty 50, right? The new starter lens for everyone that wants to do portrait, that everyone wants to get those cinematic compressed background shots for video. While not as cheap or as wide as a Sony 50mm f1.8, it is better in almost every other way. No offense to anybody that owns the 50 f1.8, but everybody kind of complains about that lens. It was one of Sony's earlier lenses that they released, and unfortunately it suffers from some of their earlier flaws, like slower autofocus, softer image quality. But with the 2.5, that has all been solved. The autofocus is nice and quick, the sharpness is incredible, the flare control is great, the build quality is awesome, and it's a G-series lens. If you're not the kind of person that likes to shoot wide-angled photos and the 24mm isn't for you, then I feel like the 50mm lens is honestly a great first lens as an introduction to the full frame lineup. It's also a take it wherever you go kind of lens, right? You're going to the park, you're taking pictures of your kids. This is gonna give you amazing photos with compressed backgrounds thanks to the 50mm focal length. However, of course, the only thing you can't do with 50mm, and it's not because of the lens, it's just because of the focal length, is you're not gonna get photos of somebody sitting directly across from you at a restaurant like your girlfriend or your boyfriend. You know, if you're gonna do food photos, you're gonna be like this high up, you know, so that's one thing to consider. Now, the last lens I wanna talk about is the 40mm f2.5G. Now, optically, all three of these lenses are very similar. The sharpness, the edge sharpness, the bokeh, right? But why 40mm, Sony? Like, it's just kind of random. Like, you know, you came out with 24, you came out with 50, why not come out with something like 35? That would have made more sense. It's way more in the middle. 40 and 50 just seem too close to each other, so I can't necessarily see you justifying getting all three lenses. Realistically, I'd say get the 24 and then either the 50 or the 40. And if I was gonna pick between the 50 and the 40, I'd pick the 50. The one scenario the 40mm made sense for me was when Annette and I were at a restaurant and we were doing that whole thing where we're sitting across from each other and I wanted to take a photo of her. The 40 was just slightly wider than the 50, and that was the one time I was like, golly gee, I'm so glad I have a 40mm lens. But other than those very rare specific situations, I think if you're gonna pick two of these three lenses, I would go for the 24 and the 50. Give yourself a wide, give yourself a semi-tight lens, and then you have a very great starting kit. I'm like slowly creeping backwards because the sun's like getting lower, and now I'm like, I don't wanna be in the sun, it's hot out today. So I've only had these lenses for 2 weeks and I have to send it back in just a few days, but what I can say is with my time with these and with the tests I've done, I have to say Sony's really set the bar for what their new lenses should be able to achieve in terms of bokeh, in terms of sharpness, in terms of build quality. These are kind of my go-to recommendations now for when people want to get into Sony and they want to get into Sony full frame. I know $600 isn't budget. There are cheaper lenses out there like Rokinon lenses that you can get for just a few $100s. But what I will say is if you want a effectively no compromise lens, these are the answer for that problem, because the only thing you're really compromising on is they're not f1.8, f1.4. And honestly, if this is your first lens, you shouldn't even have to worry about that. And my favorite lens, as I've talked about many times on this channel, is the Sony 24mm f1.4 G Master. And that lens is absolutely incredible. It's also compact, it's also lightweight, but it's $1,300. The 24 f2.8 G here is $600. That is less than half the cost of the GM, but just as good. If you were with me when I switched to Sony years ago, Sony had very few lenses. That was one of the big reasons why I didn't want to switch to Sony earlier on. That and because I hated Sony fanboys, and now I've become one, so you can call me a convert, you can call me convinced, right? And over these past few years, they've been releasing lens after lens that have been filling these spots, everything from high end to low end to mid end, and their build quality and their optical performance has constantly gone up and keeps setting the bar. So if you're looking for a full frame setup, consider the A7 III or the A7C, and also consider these three lenses, the 24, 40, and 50mm lenses. If you want to check out these lenses, go ahead and check out the links to them in the description down below. That's what I think about these lenses, guys. Let me know what you think of these lenses. What do you think of the sample footage and photos? And overall, leave some comments down in the comment section down below. Love to talk to you guys. As always, if you enjoyed the video, go ahead and leave a like, subscribe, and get notified of when new videos are released. All right, guys, that's it for this one. I'll see you in the next video. Peace.